Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people who are implementing these practices where they work and with the students that they support. Today, we're talking about the ways that your PBIS implementation can support you through the various phases of any given crisis. Y'all, this week was a big week in this house. This week, our kids went back into school in person for 2 entire days. It was a week that I honestly didn't think was ever going to come. The current pandemic that we're in started all the way back in March 2020. And I remember thinking that our kids were going to come home for a week and then it would be spring break and then they were going to go right back into the building. But then those 2 weeks stretched into 3 weeks, and then it became a month. And then we got the notice that things were going to be out indefinitely. And, you know, I think I went through the 5 stages of grief around the whole process. The first stage was denial, of course. I told myself, nah, everything's going to be fine. I mean, they're going to go back. They say indefinitely, but like they're going to go back. When we found out that all of this was actually real and that our quarantine life was going to happen, I moved right on into the second stage of anger. Oh, I was mad. How could this be happening? Doesn't anyone know what they're doing? How can we just got to get back. I was upset. I was really upset. And then came bargaining, of course. What if I just doused my kids in hand sanitizer and I wrapped them in a plastic bubble and we just like rolled to school? Could we do that? I would do anything. I'll do anything to get them back in the building. And when I realized, of course, eventually that those bargaining tools that I was using was really unreasonable, depression set in. And I came to the realization that none of us could actually do anything to move this crisis faster. We couldn't resolve it quickly. I call this particular stage my flannel shirt and sweatpants stage. And finally, of course, I moved on to acceptance, which was that if I was going to get any kind of normalcy back in my life, that it was something I would have to create it. I would have to be intentional about it. And it would have to be something that I create. So I needed to use my current systems, the things that I knew worked for us and our family, the routines, the schedules, all of that. And I was just going to have to modify them to work within this given context. Well, that's exactly what my guests did today in their schools to support their students, their staff, their communities through this challenging year. They used their PBIS implementation as a framework for how to make school work through distance learning, hybrid learning, and eventually a return to in-person instruction. With me today are Kitty Clemens and Luke Borowski from Cedarhurst School. Kitty is the assistant director there, and Luke is the behavior program manager. And also with me today is Jen Buchart from Southbridge Public Schools in Massachusetts, where she's the supervisor of culture and climate for the district. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. We're so happy to have you all here. So let's just start by having you all tell us a little bit about where you work, shall we? So Kitty, do you want to take a second to talk a little bit about Cedarhurst?
Sure. So Cedarhurst School is in Connecticut. It is a middle and high school with grades 6 through 12. It's a therapeutic school. So we have students who come from all over Connecticut from public schools. They're placed by their public school districts, and the public school districts pay their tuition here. So we have a very sort of socioeconomically diverse student body. They all have IEPs, and the students who we work with have social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties that make it challenging for them to access their education in a regular education setting. And then in addition to the middle and high school, we have a transition program for 18 to 21-year-olds, and we have a separate program that is for students who are sort of profoundly school avoidant. And that program was in existence before the pandemic and now is more needed than ever, I think. So that's Cedarhurst in a nutshell.
And Jen, do you want to tell us about Southbridge?
Sure. We're located in Massachusetts. We have 6 schools. We've got a pre-K to 1 elementary. We've got 2 elementaries that are 2 through 5, a middle school, a high school, and then we also have a therapeutic day school. We have our students, or our background of students, are lower socioeconomic status, majority Hispanic population, and we are also, our school is in receivership, where we have been underperforming for a certain amount of years. So the state has come in and taken control of our schools and taken over. So we've been doing PBIS for the past 4 years. So that's really just basics on us.
Yeah, just a little bit in a nutshell. Yeah. So we're here to talk about how your PBIS implementation has really supported you all in this last year through a really challenging time that we've all been going through. So the first thing that I want us to talk about is, so our Teach by Design article this month is really focused on the phases that we all are likely to go through during a crisis in order to get from the beginning of it through to a full recovery from it. The first phase is called the immediate crisis response. It's a super chaotic time where there's just a lot of questions and not very many answers, and everybody gets kind of like, it's just chaotic and frustrating and produces a lot of anxiety. So you all probably went through something like this in March last year, right, when everything started. And so I'm curious, what were some of the things the very first thing that you all did in that particular time? And did you immediately know that you were going to rely so heavily on your PBIS implementation in that moment, or did that come across a little later?
So I think for us at Cedarhurst, it was just about setting up and testing our platforms. So we decided that we were going to use Zoom and Google Classroom. So we just had to make sure that everybody had it downloaded, that both staff and students knew how to use it. So it was just that whole testing phase, and just introducing how to use Google Classroom efficiently, and posting the assignments and making sure that students knew how to turn in the assignments.
Yeah.
And then we also had Kitty and Betsy, who's our director, came up with a slightly altered schedule that we would use while on remote, where the days were a little bit shortened. And that provided for some extra meetings for all of us to meet as a team in the afternoon that I think was very valuable at the time. So I think initially just that those first couple of days was just making sure we had the platform set up and everybody knew how to use it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the nuts and bolts of like, how are you actually going to communicate with each other and talk to each other and do school? Like you have to get all that set up.
And actually the other really important thing that I should mention is we also did a survey with the students and the families just about finding out what access to technology they had at home and internet, just to make sure that, it's great that they know how to use the platforms, but they actually have access to it and are able to use it.
Yep.
For us,
Jen, did you have something? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, for in Southbridge, I remember we had left school on a Friday, thinking, going home for the weekend and coming back on Monday, and then getting the news that we were going to be closed, for the time being. And I think that next week was a bit of that chaotic, that feeling of like, oh no, what's going on, what's happening, and I think some of the stages that we went through, we had continued meeting as PBIS teams after probably that first week of like the oh my God, what are we going to do type of thing. And then we pulled it together, and we pulled together all 6 of our teams to start meeting weekly after that. And we went through a definite period of stages where we were planning to go back to school after April break, which we have here in Massachusetts. And, there was like hope, like we're going to return back to school, and using our PBIS framework to support that. So it happened early on for us with our planning, but the issue was that, obviously the pandemic wasn't resolving. So we kept planning, and then dates would get pushed back, and then plan again for a return, and then dates would get pushed back. And then eventually finally made the decision that, we weren't coming back. So I think there was frustration within my teams, that feeling of like doing all this work, planning to come back, and then it not happening, but ended up benefiting us for when we did return in September, because we had done so much legwork on the return and had done so much planning that it didn't feel so overwhelming when we were actually returning back. So.
Yeah. I felt that too. I mean, yeah, that first day our kids coming home, I was like, oh, well, they'll just be home for a little bit. We'll go back. But yeah, that back and forth definitely created or enhanced the feeling of chaos for sure. My mom would try and ask me like how she could help or whatever. And I just tell her like, all you can do is just make a plan and then like be ready to change it, because there was so much information and just like also like odd lack of information, during the time. So yeah, for me, it was communication during that first phase. I felt like as someone who doesn't work inside of a school, but whose life is heavily impacted by schools, it was so nice just to hear from the people that my kids were around all the time up until then. We were hearing from our daycare provider and our after school club and the principal, and then we started to hear from teachers a little bit, and it made me realize for sure how embedded school was in our community and how we did our life, that even just hearing from people was so nice. And I remember too, there was an email that I got from the YMCA, which is where, they run the after school program up here. And I think it literally said something like, we know you have questions and so do we, and we don't have the answers. Like that was their email. And instead of waiting until they did have answers and communicating with us at that point, they were like, no, our families need to hear from us. They're waiting to hear from us. And we're just going to tell them that we don't have the information that they're looking for. And even that was so useful to me in those first few days. So after that initial shock of everything, and you've got it all kind of together, you kind of had to, did you just kind of do remote school? Was everybody doing distance learning from spring until school ended in June?
We were.
You were?
Yeah, just remote.
Jen, were you kind of going back and forth between?
We were remote, but it was asynchronous remote, where they would get work packets. Unfortunately, we didn't have one-to-one technology at the time, and we're unable to do that. So, but we are one-to-one now, so it's very exciting.
Nice. Yeah, I think that for our kids, we're kind of in a similar boat. It was toward the end of the school year they started to get some synchronous learning going, but for the first little bit, it was asynchronous. So. And I think all of you now are you full-time in person, or are you still doing some hybrid?
We're hybrid.
You're doing some hybrid. Okay. So at this point in the year, looking back on all of it, what were some of the things that, some of the aspects of your PBIS implementation that really supported you and guided you along the way, that when you look back on it, you think, if we're ever in a time where our school has to go through something critical like this again, this is what I would want to focus on and make sure we have in place?
So we didn't realize, I think, within that first chaotic period of the first 2 weeks. I mean, we were doing synchronous remote the day after we left school.
Yeah.
Because we had some ability to plan ahead of time, which was really lucky. And we're small enough that we were able to get technology to all of our students. But it took us a couple weeks. It's interesting to hear you talk about it like a crisis. I think of a crisis as something that sort of lands and then it's sort of, what the crisis is, but I don't think we really understood what the crisis was, and it kept changing. So it was just a very slowly evolving situation. And it took us a couple weeks to figure out that we've got our feet under us. And then it was like, yeah, we need to meet. The team needs to meet. And then the team met, and it was like, oh yeah, we have all of this in place to support students engaging, because that was the thing that really was missing in remote for us, that, a lot of students were not signing on, were not staying on, were not having their cameras on. And so we really leaned heavily on the PBIS structures that we had in place with the existing team and we have a point and a level system. And so we had to readjust our expectations. But I think in any crisis moving forward, we will know that the first thing to do is to meet with your team and then, do a needs assessment, and then redefining expectations for us was really key. And just sort of shifting everything over to engagement, and then sort of defining, what does that look like? How are we going to keep that data? We were lucky in that we had a little bit of experience with Zoom because our students are all over Connecticut. We had been experimenting with Zoom already a little bit for parent engagement. And we have cell phones that the clinical staff can use to communicate with parents and students, and texting is the way that students communicate. So that was really helpful. And we will definitely—
You communicated with your students like that before now? Texting with them and all of that?
We had just started, because that was something we figured out with our school engagement program, that kids don't use phones and they don't use email. And that's why we had the cell phones. But it was invaluable in the remote learning. That's something I would definitely recommend to anyone. If you can get a couple of cell phones and use them to communicate with kids, you will have a much better response.
Yeah. Luke, can you talk about a little bit about the data that you collected around engagement and how you were able to kind of shift that focus and make some decisions on how to improve it?
Sure. So I think our key was to just simplify. We kind of realized pretty quick that we weren't going to be able to keep track of everything. So what we wanted to focus on was obviously attendance and engagement. So one of our social workers came up with this grid in Excel that would just have the student's name in the period, and it was color coded. And we would simply, we had about 3 or 4 categories that we went off of. If the student was there, if the student was responsive, or if they were only there for part of the period, or if they weren't there at all. So what we did is at the very beginning of each class, a teacher would send out a pre-populated email to all the social workers, just letting them know who's there and maybe a quick little line about they're participating or not. And then the social workers would be able to kind of in real time be able to reach out to both really the students and the parents and to try to get them to re-engage. And then so the data was really helpful in the moment. And then at the end of the week, we would be able to kind of look at the big picture and, identify which students were struggling, what parts of the day they were struggling. And then that kind of helped us with even just simplifying our level system. And we went from having 3 different levels to just having 2 levels, and simplifying kind of, as long as you were engaging, 80% of the time is what we were looking for. We would kind of try to reward that.
Yeah.
So it was
I love that you guys were able to shift like that, to be able to use that data, which is very clearly something that you guys were doing as a team, to recognize that you were, your priorities had to shift, and what was the behaviors that you were trying to improve upon when students were no longer in your building. So I really liked, your example when we had talked earlier about using that data differently and how you were able to include that in the way that you were communicating with the social workers too. I think that's excellent. Jen, what about you guys? What were some of the things that you all did?
So I think as far as our PBIS implementation, I think that was one of our strongest points of not recreating the wheel. I think that sometimes when you're in like a situation and a bit of panic and like, what are we going to do? Realizing what we have and what we already have in place and using that and leveraging that was one of the strongest things that we did around our COVID expectations, around our incentive system, consequences, clearing consistent reteaching of expectations. I think things that we've struggled with in the past are like getting everyone to buy into school rules and things like that, and teaching them and following them, consistently between classes. So like cell phones are allowed in one class, maybe not another type of thing. But with COVID, it kind of helped us all unite and come together and teach these expectations. And that's kind of the example we've been using to like push our PBIS and just make it stronger in our in our classes, in our schools. So
say more about that. What do you mean you've been using that as an example for how you can improve upon the way that the perception around behavioral expectations?
So I think it's a buy-in piece. I think with older grades, specifically like middle school and high school, there is like a perception that students should know how to should have certain skills, should be doing certain behaviors at that age. But sometimes you do have to do some reteaches with kids on certain skills and help build them up to be, great students, amazing, successful students. So I think using that example that we were all on the same page and we were all united around COVID, and we didn't have like expectations. You don't have to wear a mask in my room. It was everyone had to do it. So using that example as a leverage for buy-in for all of the rest of our expectations, our school rules has been helpful in just our buy-in in our secondary schools.
I'm curious too. I know that so you're in your regular ordinary life in school, you're focused on culture and climate. And I wondered what your perception was during this past year on how you could maintain a positive school culture, or even to try and transition it into distance and remote learning and back and forth between, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm curious how you all were able to do that.
So I think for us, we've been fortunate enough, we have a partnership with UConn. So we were able to actually do a climate survey with our staff and our students at the beginning around like December, January, to kind of see where kids were at, see where staff were at, like around their perception of school. So we did get a good data source there. A lot of the information that we got was around students feeling really disconnected from their friends. So moving forward, we had to come up with ideas to kind of give kids opportunities to have conversations. We added a late bus in. We've added some sports drills. We can't really have like technically sports, but we've added like some drills after school where kids can stay after school. We've added in some after school times with teachers. We have after school programs. So kind of leveraging that so that students have a chance to engage. And then of course, like we do a ton of spirit days and like fun days that involve both, in person and remote. And it kind of boosts everyone's morale a bit, getting to do some funny stuff.
Yeah. Kitty and Luke, did you all experience something similar with students feeling disconnected from each other? And I mean, especially you all, you've got students that are spread out. They're not even in the same town necessarily. And how did you overcome that?
I think we definitely did. And one of the things that we did is we offered clubs after school hours. So, and we had social workers and teachers that would volunteer, and we would do things like cooking clubs that students would be able to sign up for. We had, like a game club, and obviously most of it at the time, or all of it, was virtual. Some of them meet kind of in person now, some of our groups. But just giving an outlet to the students, even though it was virtual, it was just in a room where they would be able to participate in an activity and have some level of, just being able to socialize.
Mhm.
We also
So I think that
we started doing a school-wide community meeting once a week, which Luke runs. And I remember the first community meeting, which we actually didn't have until late last spring, but when we were still sort of solidly in lockdown.
Mhm.
It was the kids were just so happy to see each other. And even though it was in Zoom, it was just a really palpable sense of, I don't know, just joy to see each other. And a lot more than we thought showed up. A lot of them showed up.
Right.
It was really
The
nice.
excitement around school was real in those days.
Yeah. And now we still do it. It's remote, but the kids who are in opposite cohorts get to see each other. They see each other anyway in class, but it's more of a, less structured thing.
Yeah. So I'm hearing from you all the things that worked out really nicely were having those consistent team meetings, looking at data to make adjustments to where you're focusing your time, and helping students to maintain the community that they love and provide them opportunities to connect with each other. I think that's really wonderful. Were there any things that you guys tried that you thought this is going to be great and it was a flop?
I think
it was perfect. Great. That's great.
I think one of the things that we kind of struggled with was just recognizing students in the moment for anything that they were doing well. Pre-pandemic, we used a kind of a token economy.
Yeah.
We had physical tickets that we would use, and just giving them that ticket, and saying, it kind of just really reinforced the praise that they were getting. And virtually, I think that praise was happening verbally, and we even on, we still use the virtual behavioral cards now, where we do put the number of the tickets earned per period, but it's just not the same, I think, as just receiving it in person, and just even encouraging them to check their cards more often, so that if they have any any questions about why they earned a certain amount of points based on the expectations. Again, when it's given to them physical, they will automatically kind of glance at it, where now it's virtual. They just have to open up a document. So just kind of reminding them that they need to do that, so that the reinforcements are more in the moment. I think that's kind of the hardest on our end.
Well, and when you're dealing with school that's when it's virtual, especially, there's so much that takes so much energy and attention that the technology takes, that it definitely is a struggle to try and make those connections, I would say, in the moment over a screen, when you're also dealing with like pulling up an app or like navigating to a certain spot or clicking something. There's just more involved for teachers, I would say, in a virtual environment. Yeah.
And then I think coming up with activities for the students that would be rewarding as well, that they could then trade in those tickets.
Yeah.
Everything, a lot of the activities traditional activities we had planned, it's like, well, we can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore. So we kind of surveying the students and getting ideas from them, like, hey, what would you guys like to earn, and what can we offer you, keeping in mind that we have these restrictions in place. What would motivate you? So, just sending those surveys out, and then actually, listening to the feedback and then being able to offer those activities to them.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jen? Did you all try anything that didn't work out the first time?
I think Luke stole mine. I'd have to completely second the incentive system, especially supporting remote students. It looks really good on paper when you plan it, but sometimes implementation can be very, very tricky. And I think thinking of like how big some of our schools are, and like getting the actual items to students that were remote was a huge challenge. We have a great team here who they were making deliveries. We had a Google form, but then also like communication to students too was also really, really hard because emails sometimes get missed, messages on the Google Classroom get missed, and plus just the overwhelmingness of switching to this world for students. Like you're getting 50 million messages from your other Google Classrooms, you're trying to keep up with your work, you're trying to go on to the, so I think for some of that was really challenging. And then like sometimes kids they would buy an item from the school store and it's like a bag of chips, and like having a parent, like justifying a parent driving out to the school to come pick up a bag of chips, you know, it's a big deal. But I think that has been a huge challenge. And then also just using the praise correctly for remote, you know, that's just, it's hard. So.
Yeah. Luke, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you had a group of students that you met with pretty regularly to get their feedback on some of the different things that you all could be doing to support students, and even like PBIS in general, like what they were looking for. Can you tell us a little bit? Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you know, just like the team meets every single week, I meet with a select group of volunteers. And you know, the nice thing is the volunteers kind of come from all different kinds of homerooms, and there's a couple of middle schoolers in there. So but we have a small group that also meet with me every single week. And we just talk about, you know, the activities that are happening, the things that are the items that we have in the school store. And again, they're just able to give me suggestion. And my message to them is talk to your classmates. You know, you see them in classes more often than I do. So, you know, you're kind of the representatives, you're the leaders. It just kind of also gives them, I think, a purpose and a sense of buy-in to the community. And then we're currently working on having them kind of coaching them up and having them run some of the PBS lessons, so that it's not just coming from the staff. So we're still working on that. I'm very hopeful that within the next couple of weeks, you know, they're going to be able to deliver some of those PBS lessons, which I think is going to be more meaningful coming from the students rather than just, you know, the staff all the time.
Of course. Yeah. Was that a practice that you had done before all of this, or was this brand new to you, that something you came up with in this moment?
It wasn't brand new. We have done it. I don't think we've done it consistently, but we've had a couple of periods where we've used that before. We used to call them ambassadors. Where we would kind of do the same thing, use them to kind of teach some of the PBS lessons. But as far as a lot of the PBS stuff, we used to have student council when we were in person, and with the new schedule and being remote, we no longer had that. So the kind of the team kind of picks up some of the slack from that.
That's excellent. Do you think that, so it sounds like you were able to kind of use this time as an opportunity to just test out something, and it's going to work maybe for you in the future. Are there other things that worked out for any of you? It's a question for everyone. Is there anything that worked out this time and during this time that you think, well, this worked out better than the way we were doing it before? We're going to do this moving forward. And what would those things be?
So I think one thing for us, you know, I mentioned the behavioral cards that we used that were, you know, it was a physical card that they carried. I think there's some definite advantages to having it, you know, done digitally. We're able to get that data right away. You know, we have formulas in there that are able to compile the data, so we're able to look at it. I think it takes, you know, it's less time consuming for the staff to actually they don't have to input it. It's kind of right there. So I think that was really helpful. I think we were forced to kind of look for some of the new technology and just, you know, going through like Google Docs and Google Sheets and actually kind of teaching it to ourselves so that we can be more proficient with it. And I think I think we still have a little bit of ways to go. I think we could improve on it. But I think there's some advantages to it that we would definitely like to keep that moving forward.
That's awesome. Jen, did you have other things?
I think for two areas that we have been lacking in and put into place was an orientation practice for students that were switching between modes. We had never really had an official like orientation process for students, but because of students, switching from remote to in person, we really needed something in place to kind of get kids caught up on how different school was. And that has been just one of the greatest pieces that have been created. We've gotten students involved in that. They do tours, they help teach some expectations. So that's a legacy that I hope continues throughout when we have new students just coming into the school to, give them a nice orient them to the school and the rules and show them around and welcome them.
I love how involved these kids have become in the school and the way that it works, and teaching some of the other students how things are supposed to be. When you go to school here, this is how you do it, Kitty, how about you in your administrative role? Are there any aspects of your work that you found actually are a little bit better in this time that you want to take moving forward?
I mean, I think this is pretty basic, but I think that Zoom meetings are definitely going to be in our future. As much as we complain about them, it will allow us to meet with teams from sending school districts and
yes,
collateral folks and parents in a more timely way and more readily. And then also, I just think that this isn't really, I guess, specific to the pandemic, but that period you described at the beginning with the chaos and the uncertainty, it just really became so clear to me how much teachers, as an administrator, care about their students. I mean, I already knew that, but it really was just so abundantly clear, and how important it is for administrators to support their teachers and to really use PBIS practices with teachers also. They need praise, they need support. It just really expanded my empathy, which was already quite abundant for teachers.
I think that's a really lovely note to end on. Well, where can folks find out a little bit more information about the things that you all are doing? Maybe your school, maybe you're involved in some research. Where could they find out some more information?
So we have a website, and we are post a lot of things on the website. So it's cedarhurst.yale.edu.
Perfect. How about you, Jen?
Same for us. We have a website, southbridgepublic.org. We post a lot of information there, and then could always reach out by email. Always happy to share resources or matrices or lesson plans, whatever anyone needs.
Great. So this is where we get to a brand new segment for our Expert Instruction podcast. It's called After School. It's where we ask our guests for their favorite thing in the moment. Today, we're asking our guests to give us their best tip or trick for living this distance learning life that we're all in these days. I'll let you guys who wants to start? Who's got a trick?
I'll start.
Okay.
This is not necessarily after school, it's for in school, but one of the ways that we've just started to reinforce student engagement when they're home remotely is by having surprise guests stop in randomly to classrooms and reward anyone who's on screen at that moment.
Ooh.
And the students find it really fun, and also because it's randomized reinforcement, it's very effective. You never know
these special guests who shows up.
we had a teacher, as an example, who was out on leave, a medical leave, and everyone was really missing her. And when she was feeling up for it, she came in and visited all the classrooms.
Oh, that's special.
And gave out some rewards for anyone on screen.
Excellent.
I think one of the things that has kind of helped me through all of this is checking in with other professionals that are in our profession, other teachers, but from other buildings or other schools. And sometimes I think just to put in perspective, when you're in the building and you're struggling with something and you kind of second guess yourself, am I doing this right? Like, why? Maybe I'm not getting the results. And then you kind of talk to teachers from other schools and they kind of normalize it for you. And they kind of let you know, like, maybe you're doing better than what you thought you were. So just that perspective of like leaving your little bubble and kind of reaching out to those around you, I think has been really, really helpful.
It's so good to like talk to other people, because you have this sense, right, that everyone is going through this, that you're not alone, but also it's nice to hear it from people. You just mentally, I have it in my mind, like, yeah, I get it. Like everybody's like, we're all doing this and everybody gets this struggle, but to like make a connection with somebody and they like verbalize it, you're like, oh, thank God. Yeah. Like, yeah. Jen, how about you? What's your trick?
I think for during our team meetings, sometimes, being online and trying to collect all of this information, some of my coaches have been using Jamboard. And that has been an amazing way for us to collect ideas and make sure we don't miss anyone's ideas. So that's been like our distance learning trick or tip that we use in our meetings now, which is very, very helpful.
Great. In our office, mine is that in our office, we had a group of us that all shared kind of a similar area. And every day there would be a group of us that would sit down and we would have breakfast and coffee together, and then we'd go back to work. And of course, now that we're all doing our work from home, we couldn't do that. So we made it a priority to set up a day during the week where we could all still get together, have a chat, eat our breakfast, and then head out. It's super informal. Everyone can come if they want to come, or not come if they want to come. One of our colleagues, Brian, he's always the first one on, and he's always playing music when you get on. So even when you get a log on, if you don't want to talk, you don't have to. You can just listen to Brian's music going. But it's been really nice. It's been just a nice way to keep in touch with each other and check in and have some of that like in the hallway information that would just naturally comes up on that Zoom. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate having you all here. And we'll talk to you soon.